Coloradans are going to get an unreliable grid and you're going to be facing blackouts. That's what you'll pay for as they chase this illusion of no emissions. They're never going to get there, but you and I are going to pay a lot of money feeding the egos of those who want to look at energy policy solely through the myopic lens of emissions. You have to be able to keep the lights on. It's not an option.
Welcome to the OpEdge, the Gazette's opinion podcast, where we bring you cutting-edge perspectives from Colorado's top newsmakers, columnists, and more. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, investigative columnist and your host for today's program. Colorado's electrification agenda is afoot, and it's squeezing homeowners and businesses alike. To dive into the state's energy policy issues and more, I'm pleased to be joined by Senior Fellow in Energy Policy at the Independence Institute and President, Chairman, and Co-founder of Always On Energy Research, Amy Oliver Cooke. Amy, welcome to the OpEdge.
Thanks for having me, Jimmy.
It is good to talk with you. You are a wearer of many hats in the energy space, and given what's happening in Colorado, nobody better to talk to. If you were to paint a big picture image of what Colorado is doing right now as far as its energy policy, before we dive in, let's set the table there. How would you sum it up?
Insanity, I think, might be a good way to put it. Now, the Colorado trajectory on energy policy. If I were to make it a movie, it would be Thelma and Louise, and we're about ready to go over the cliff. It is wild. It's going to be wildly expensive. It's going to be unreliable. It's going to destroy the economy. If we continue on the same trajectory we are on, it will absolutely devastate the state.
Now, one of the big aspects of this, of course, is the fact that the government is driving this through state energy policy and electrification mandates. You have the zero emission standards that they want the state to be targeting and so forth. When it comes to some of those policies at the top level, what are a couple of things that really stand out as the biggest impediments to achieving energy success in Colorado and lower prices?
So you bring up a good point. It's all about state energy policy. States have have control over their generating portfolios. It is not the federal government, it is state policy. So look no further than your state legislature and your governor and the regulatory agencies that surround it. So a couple of things to look at. One is this: right now we have 100% renewable mandate by 2050. 100% renewable mandate by 2050. First of all, we'll never get there. We'll never get there. We will pay a ton of money trying to get there, but we'll never get there because you can't power a grid with wind and solar because they're intermittent and they're unreliable. And here's what they say, Jimmy. They say, well, we're going to have battery backups. Oh, and they expect to have 12-hour battery backups. We are literally putting our energy future. Think about that. Power is in everything we do. They're putting it into technology that doesn't exist yet. And we're only 25 years away. They're like, oh, well, it'll be there by then. Who does that? Who guarantees or says we are going to put our entire economic future into technology that doesn't exist yet? So that's number one, this 100% renewable mandate. The other one is the elimination of natural gas, which of course all sort of folds into this 100% renewable mandate. But we would know that by its popular name called the Clean Heat Plan. I guarantee you it won't be clean. People are going to burn whatever they can in order to stay warm during the winter. So we are eliminating natural gas. And they'll say, no, it's not a natural gas ban, except for they are going to, when I say they, I mean, legislatively, and then the governor signed it, and the PUC is implementing it. And the way it is going to force you off of your natural gas. So that means your stove, your hot water heater, your furnace, your fireplace, whatever, is they're going to make it so cost prohibitive that the only option you will have will be to be forced off of it. And you're going to start seeing that coming up in the next few years, because these utilities, which are required to essentially eliminate all emissions from natural gas, well, the only way to do it is to throw customers off of the system. How do you do that? You make it so expensive. So, for instance, I have a very old house, and we have two separate heating and cooling units. I will have to replace both of those, plus my hot water heaters. The cost could be $20,000 per unit. So I have 2 units. You're talking about $40,000. That's just for me to comply with this. Doesn't even count the additional that I'm going to have to pay, because we have to build out a grid that can now support all the people that were using natural gas. We have to build a grid to support that. Now, if you're irritated by blackouts already because there's public safety blackouts or whatever that is, I guarantee you it is going to get a whole bunch worse as we throw millions of people off of their natural gas and force them onto a grid that is ill-prepared to receive those additional customers.
And that's what I wanted to bring up next, Amy, and that is reliability of the grid. If you don't have a reliable grid that can sustain all of the energy usage that people are going to need, especially with the expansions of data centers, for example, with AI and quantum computing, relying upon data centers, and hopefully more data centers can and will be built in Colorado. But if you don't have the reliable grid, those blackouts certainly are going to be more common. And even more so, the blackouts that are intended as safety blackouts are only going to become more common because they're directly linked.
And so a couple of points in that. One is that Colorado has spent a lot of, I would call, legislative capital trying to figure out what to do with data centers. Here's a little spoiler alert for you. Data center developers aren't looking at Colorado. You hear a lot about it, but data centers don't look here. I mean, some do, but most developers look at other states. And why is it? 1, cost of electricity. 2 is the fact that no data center is going to develop or build in a state where it must have 100% intermittent resources. They just won't do it because they need 24/7, 365 days a year, they need that kind of power. So, and then as far as the reliability piece, this is important. The existential threat is not climate change. The existential threat we face right now is lack of power, is the fact that we may not have power when we need it. So if you've got a medical device, or you've got something that you must keep power, I tell people all the time, get a giant battery backup, get a generator, get something to firm your own grid. Colorado's grid is, actually, here's a perfect example. Xcel Energy has already told the Public Utilities Commission that its reserve margin goes negative this year, and that next year it is unlikely to have enough power to keep the lights on in summer of 2027. They have said that in public filings. This is not Amy Cooke saying it. This is the utility saying, we don't have the power to keep the lights on. And then they said, well, go out and buy it. We're going to import it. The power isn't available. That is why you're seeing this move to keep Comanche 2 online and then extend the life of Comanche 3. And I don't even hate to say I told you so anymore, because in fact, I like it. We told you back in 2018 when we intervened in that rate case on keeping Comanche, what to do with Comanche 1, 2, and 3. Spent $500,000 using an expert witness, had a great attorney. And you know what? Even the staff agreed that they didn't think the cost savings were likely to materialize. But here's the other thing. We said in those proceedings, you close Comanche 2, there is no plan to replace that base load energy. So none of this should shock anyone who has paid attention. We knew this was going to happen. We said it was going to happen. And here we are, fast forward, we're end of 2025, beginning of 2026. It's happening. You cannot power a grid without firm baseload power. That means coal, that means natural gas, and that means nuclear. Take your pick, but you can't do it without it. And if Colorado tries, we've already modeled it. When I say we, I mean Always On Energy Research has modeled it for the Independence Institute. It's gonna be hundreds of billions of dollars. And for that, Jimmy, Coloradans are going to get an unreliable grid, and you're going to be facing blackouts. That's what you'll pay for as they chase this illusion of no emissions. They're never going to get there. But you and I are going to pay a lot of money feeding the egos of those who want to look at energy policy solely through the myopic lens of emissions. We think you need to look at reliability one, and then I would call one, and then 1A is cost, but you have to be able to keep the lights on. It's not an option, but it certainly seems to be if you talk to leadership
Right.
at the legislature and in the governor's office.
By the way, the Comanche plants, of course, that you're mentioning are the coal-fired plants, and the Gazette has editorialized as well, warning about what will happen if you shut down those plants, because you don't have the reliable energy. And this is the point that you're definitely getting at and really drilling home, Amy, is that if you don't have those reliable, tried and true energy sources, coal, natural gas, and nuclear, which there's now more talk of nuclear expansions, which is encouraging. And Secretary of Energy Chris Wright, Coloradan through and through, was just in Colorado touting that. But if you don't have those reliable sources, then it's not going to be possible to keep the lights on as you're talking about. And so that leads to the discussion more so about wind and solar, because we often hear, and you alluded this before, that wind and solar are the future. That's what we need to invest in. They're going to be much more cost effective, especially as time goes on and they're able to make them more efficient and so forth. What does the research show as far as the actual reliability and affordability, not just in the short term, but the longer term of wind and solar, especially given that there's such a lean in by Xcel and other energy companies in Colorado on those renewable sources?
So let's start with the lean in. They lean into it because they get to build. The more a utility builds, the more money it makes. So as Xcel Energy's, we call that the rate base. It's what they base your electric rates on, my electric rates on. If they're guaranteed 10% of their rate base, and currently it's at, I don't know, 13 billion, maybe 13 to 14 billion, but that is projected to double by 2030. Do the math. 10% of 30 billion is a whole lot more than 10% of 13 to 14 billion. So that's why they, quote, lean into it. The subsidies, they've been incentivized, which I would call perverse incentives. So what does the research show on the reliability side? Here's what I ask people. Okay, let's say you're an employer and you have to hire a salesperson or a cashier. Would you hire somebody that only showed up 20% of the time? And then you also had to have a backup employee that you paid regardless, 365 days a year. You have a backup employee who's always on call, because you're never sure when the employee who who's only there 20% of the time, you're never quite sure exactly when they're going to show up and when they're not going to show up. That's what we're doing with our electric grid, and that's how to explain wind and solar. They are intermittent, they're unreliable, they are non-dispatchable, which means they aren't there when you need them. There's no guarantee that they will be there. So when it's Winter Storm Fern and the temperature is plummeting to below zero, guess what didn't show up in Colorado? It was wind and solar. And in fact, what is it? Something like 40% of Excel's resource base is wind. I could be off on that, but 85% of the power in Colorado when the temperatures got cold during Winter Storm Fern, 85% came from fossil fuels, came from natural gas, and it came from coal. God bless both of them, or the rest of us would have been freezing. There's a reason why wind and solar, why we started using more dense fuels. It is really the story of American progress. I actually wrote a newsletter on this. 1776, Americans were pretty much using all renewables. It was human labor, it was burning wood, it was farm animals, it was actually, water wheels. As we began using more dense fuel, coal, oil, things like that, we began burning that. We unleashed American innovation. You and I are sitting here doing what we do because we don't have to spend hours out in the fields preparing, growing food and preparing it. We don't have to toil, chopping wood or trying to gather fuel, because as we've used denser and more efficient fuel sources like fossil fuels, like nuclear, we've unleashed the American innovative spirit. You can be a teacher, you can be an engineer, you can stay at home if you choose, you can be an entrepreneur, you can be whatever you want. But all of that is because of our energy abundance. It's because we've used fossil fuels and we've used them as every year we use them more efficiently. And I will throw nuclear in there too. I'm a huge nuclear fan. Lived in North Carolina for 4.5 years, where 30% of Duke Energy's generating portfolio is nuclear. It is, and it's like a workhorse. It is just rock solid.
Well, we'll get more to nuclear in just a moment, but I do want to point out, recently the Gazette editorialized that Xcel Energy's state-mandated clean energy plan is estimated to cost $12 billion. Of course, you and I both know it could cost substantially more than that in the longer run, but Xcel's already seeking approval for an 11.4% natural gas rate increase, a nearly 10% electricity hike. This is after having in recent years also gotten hikes for both, and further hikes are inevitable amid, as we've been talking about, state-mandated emission cuts and premature coal plant closures, pricing out businesses and raising housing costs. Just to put a few of the numbers on it, that's the end result of the policies that we are talking about in this conversation.
You're 100% right. So consider your current electricity bill. Now double it. And then triple it. And by the way, PUC Chairman Eric Blank said, rates could triple. And I would agree with that. And I actually think it's going to be way more than just triple. And good for the Gazette for editorializing on this and sounding the alarm. Here's the thing, you're absolutely right. $12 billion. I do think that's low, but that's probably the figure that might be the figure that Xcel is throwing out at this point. But what it doesn't include, so when you look at your Xcel bill or other bills, I don't know who everybody's energy providers are, but you'll see a whole bunch of other line items. Those are all things we call riders. And those aren't even, they're siloed. So your bill is going to go up substantially more because every time the General Assembly, and The last one was on was on distribution. And we started calling it the Fenberg rider after Steve Fenberg, because he was the huge champion of it. It allows them to silo particular costs. So it doesn't necessarily, the rates are only going to be, it's only going to cost this amount. But then you have all of those riders on there. And something else that you said, and I want to bring this up because the Gazette was, they did a story on it, plus they editorialized on it. It's what we call the social cost of blackouts. So in Colorado, the Public Utility Commission requires that utilities factor in this social cost of carbon. So for every ton of carbon emitted, what is the quote social cost? And they put a dollar figure on it. Well, at Always On Energy, we believe that you can't just do one side of the equation. You have to have the other externality, that if you're going to force the social cost of carbon, then you have to look at the social cost of blackouts, which is the cost of to a business, to a family, to anyone who loses power over a certain amount of time. And this actually, believe it or not, the idea of it came out of Colorado because there was a blackout. And Isaac Orr and Mitch Rolling, who co-founded Always On Energy Research with me, they called this small grocery store or market in Niwot and just talked to him and said, so what does that cost you? What does that cost your business? And they said, I forget, and I think it was like $12,000 an hour, because they lost their refrigeration and then the food spoils. So there is a cost to not having power. And I would say, besides the other obvious, which is that we're not just talking about people getting asthma, we're talking about people dying when you lose power. You look no further than Texas, which saw 246 deaths because they lost power during, what was that, winter storm? I'll think of it. Whatever winter storm that was. It was 2021. But there is a real cost to not having power, and it is beyond just the cost of business. People lose their lives.
Recently, going to nuclear power, Amy, the Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright, was just in Colorado, and he said for the first time in more than 4 decades, a new privately developed non-light water reactor has reached criticality in the United States. And he was particularly pointing to 2 advanced reactor tests that had happened in June, including a successful demonstration by the Antares nuclear facility at the Idaho National Laboratory. And there's more in terms of expansions there. There's also these smaller modular nuclear reactors that are being talked about. I know a lot of rural parts of Colorado governments are already looking at how can we implement these resources. And you would think, by the way, that those who are very concerned about climate change would be jumping on this because there are 0 emissions that come from nuclear power. Talk to us about what that potential, the nuclear potential, if you will, could be for Colorado and for the entire country.
Yeah, actually, I'm really excited about this. I've always loved nuclear, been a fan of it. And in Colorado, I think the first time I started writing about nuclear may have been 2014, 2015, when you still couldn't say it in polite company. Like, nope. She said the N word in energy was nuclear. You couldn't talk about it. But it was interesting, again, living in North Carolina, where the Southeast they're like, yeah, we do nuclear. It's great. And those are people, by the way, those people will stare down a hurricane like it's a Tuesday. So nuclear power, which stays on 24/7, especially in a state like, in the Southeast states that lose power for hurricanes, nuclear has proven to be the workhorse. What goes down are the power lines. It's not the resource itself. So the opportunity in the United States, first of all, I'm so glad we're getting over, there's a generation, probably your generation, Jimmy, that doesn't have that. You don't carry the baggage of nuclear energy, which included 3 Mile Island, Jane Fonda in that horrible movie, China Syndrome. Chernobyl, you don't carry that baggage. And what I love about your generation is that you embrace new technology, you love innovation, and you're connected. You guys have, I have kids your age. Listen, their phones are everything to them. They're 24/7 connected. And that's what nuclear power does. And the idea, I love this idea. Think of, imagine if we could just take small mini reactors and run them on rail cars or run them on flatbed trucks and take them to wherever they need to be deployed. The military uses these. They look for them for forward operating units where obviously no power lines and no access to infrastructure. So they love those small modular reactors. Here's the thing. And here's part of the rub. Those who dislike nuclear, and I'll name names, the Sierra Club and Rocky Mountain Institute, Amory Lovins sitting up top his compound in Aspen or Snowmass, where Rocky Mountain Institute, I guess, built his home, which is completely maximizing solar. Good for him, he has that, but he has been critical. I would say he has been one of nuclear energy's harshest critics, as has Rocky Mountain Institute. They come from that Paul Ehrlich sort of line, or that way of thinking, where it was. He said this is what Paul Ehrlich said about nuclear energy in the early 70s. He said, giving affordable, clean power to society is the equivalent of giving, and these are his words, an idiot child a machine gun. In other words, they'll use it. They won't know what to do with it. They'll do so. They did not like nuclear energy because it was clean. It is clean, and it would be incredibly efficient. So I'm glad that baggage is moving away. Your generation is really carrying this and telling people, or hey mom, hey dad, hey grandma, hey grandpa. No, we like nuclear. Once you learn about nuclear, the more you learn about it, the more you love it. Here's what we need to do. And this is where the Sierra Clubs, Rocky Mountain Institute can really gum up the works, is that they keep saying we've got to cut emissions now. We don't have time for nuclear energy. We don't have time. We need to give nuclear energy the runway it needs to get it built out. And that might mean natural gas. It means keeping coal plants online. It means all of those things, all of that baseload energy that we need, giving that time so that we can build out nuclear. Nuclear really is the answer.
Just a couple quick final things. One, how far gone is Colorado? Is there any chance that we might see the ship righted, or are we circling back to the very beginning, going to be falling off that cliff, especially in the new year when you see a change in state leadership?
So I'm actually really optimistic about the United States. Let me start there. Even blue states are starting to they're getting a dose of energy reality. They've seen the costs. They realize they need baseload power. Purple states are doing the same thing. Utah is really the gold standard. I mean, they take a holistic approach to their energy policy, and essentially what they say is, we will always make sure that Utah has reliable baseload power. So in other words, if you're a utility about to shut down a baseload power plant, the state of Utah, and it may be even they may have legislated this, but they look at it and go, is this an asset we need for the security of Utah? So I have a lot of hope. I'm very optimistic about the United States. I'm very optimistic that net zero is not going to, it's not going to stand for much longer. There are going to be outliers. And those outliers are places like California and probably Colorado. I just don't, right now, with the current state of Colorado energy policy and what the new leadership looks like, I don't have a lot of faith that Colorado is going to change trajectory soon. So with that, I would encourage everybody, get your own generator. But I do feel really good about the rest of the United States. I think they are waking up to this folly of net zero. And what will happen is Colorado will then become economically will be just totally uncompetitive. And eventually they will come around. But I don't see it happening in the next 4 years with what's likely to happen in November 2026.
Finally, is there anything that the average person, that any of our listeners can do to help maybe challenge the energy policy direction of this state to at least attempt to right the ship?
Great question. Well, first of all, and I'll say it again, first of all, make sure you take care of your own home, your own business, get a generator and get backup batteries. I've just do that. You've got to watch out for yourselves because the state won't do it. That's number one. Number two, ask every single one of any candidate that comes to your door. I don't care if they're running for school board, city council, dog catcher, coroner, every single candidate that knocks on your door or you go to a town hall, you ask them, how do they feel? What is their energy policy? Ask them how they feel about, quote, net zero. Ask them, challenge them, and then say, what are they going to do when the lights don't come on? And we can't afford to pay for it. And if they tell you that wind and solar are cheaper, I've got a place where you can go. Always on energy research, aoenergy.org. Listen, you want proof? We've got the data for you, but you should challenge every single candidate on their energy policy because it's in everything. They'll say, well, I'm here for school board. Well, you know what? How is the school system going to pay its energy bills? How are they going to keep the lights on for kids? Ask them those things and make them answer you. Also, submit comments to the Public Utilities Commission. You can look it up under, just Google search Colorado Public Utilities Commission, and there's a place for public comments. Swap them with comments that you want to make sure they must guarantee. I tell you what, they're sensitive to this. They don't want to own reliability, but they are going to own it. Say, you want to make sure you're holding them personally accountable if those lights don't come on or if you can't afford your bill. That's what I do.
There you go. Amy Oliver Cooke with both the Independence Institute and Always On Energy Research. Thanks so much for joining us on the OpEdge. Appreciate your insights. Thanks for tuning in to the OpEdge. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to give us a like, subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, and be sure to pass along to your friends and colleagues. For the Gazette, I'm Jimmy Sengenberger.